A wounded animal flees or hides, and I'll admit to doing the same as destiny came crashing upon my shores. Dragons somehow seemed to always knew where I was, if I was scouting in Dawn Star, or strolling along the cemetery in Falkreath. Somehow I was rarely alone. The Nords with their thick heads and death wishes would always rush to my aid to take one down. But after a while, it was only a moderate challenge for me as my arrows seemed to sing true and I conquered the most dangerous prey, much like a hunter stalking an elk. I had been given a house call, Lydia. She was a simple Nord woman, but more than a capable warrior, something quite common among Nord women. The author of my tale once asked about my love, and I remember telling him regardless of my eventual fame there weren't many who shared my bed in those days. My mind was a jumble of confusion. Some nights I could barely sleep, and others I was a bear, wolf, or even dragon in my dreams. I had base urges and bestial instincts. Occasionally I sated them, sometimes with gold, but the only desire I always had to sate was my lust for blood. I usually preferred traveling alone, so I left Lydia to manage Bree's home and my domestic affairs in Whiterun. She'd occasionally have a warm meal and some ale for me when I made my rounds. She became a welcome sight in that dimly lit little cottage. But to domesticate her, or, worse, better, seemed an awful insult to her capabilities. She suspected my darker dealings and she'd remark about the Thieves' Guild, on occasion, but she always left the Dark Brotherhood unmentioned. After a month, maybe a bit longer, we began to actively converse when I was in Whiterun until one night she asked a real question of me. I thought it'd be why I stole, why I killed, or even how could I be such a monster. But what she asked me was far worse. It was, why was I so kind to barmaids, of orphans, and homeless beggars? I admit an anger rose in me, and I remarked, perhaps with too loud of a voice, that I could just easily kill those barmaids, orphan children, and beggars tomorrows if I so choose. She ignored everything I said, except for one word, choose. When I was choose not to kill was just as important as when I did. We sat silent for a few minutes, until I started to fumble for an explanation. Those same people, with a bit of coin, could be invaluable sources of information or temporary allies. She shrugged and wondered if instead of being a destined savior of Skyrim, that it was my destiny to be saved by Skyrim. The shared roar of laughter felt good. What was it that Skyrim would save me from? I asked it. She said, saved from never truly belonging to a place, neither boss mare nor dun mare. I had never really belonged. I told her that I belonged to the unending oblivion governed by Sithis, the Dread Father, who came before and after all else. Such an open admission shocked her, for a moment, but remarked everything started from nothing and eventually went back to nothing. I raised a toast to that. In that moment, she was the embodiment of life as my time in the Brotherhood was the embodiment of death. I thought back to my earliest days in worship of Arkay, the only one of the 8 with whom I felt a degree of kinship. She excused herself, for the night was growing long, but said that no matter my destiny she'd be here, waiting. I still, to this very night, don't know if that wasn't an invitation or a mere observation, but the next day I decided to climb the steps to the Greybeards. I thought the north of Skyrim was cold, but this was what I think the void felt like. There were those, along the way, who made this a religious pilgrimage, and I wondered to which Daedra, a prince they had pledged fealty to. The home of the Greybeards was both feared and revered by the locals, a home of ancient cold stone and iron. They lived a hard life to a single task, to learn the deepest secrets of Tharm, great words of power given to the first dragonborn, impressed dragon slayers of Akatosh. I had never given Akatosh much mind. I heard stories of how the last dragonborn emperor, as his avatar, had banished Maruna stayed gone from the material plane. But in his wake, the first dragons such as Alduin had enslaved the ancient peoples and would one day return to destroy the world and end the cycle. These monks didn't care who I was, in the sense of casting judgment on my darkness, but when they formally addressed me they knew who I was. They told me that it was I that didn't know myself, not in my fullness, and the greatest among mentioned in the Elder Scrolls didn't know them, least not in the beginning. I took training with them to begin to master the great voices that would help me on my way to fulfill my destiny as Dovahkiin. At the very least, I'd have a few new tricks in my bag for when I needed them. I quested for them, for the Horn of the Founder, Yginwin Collar, but from then on Akatosh joined the likes of Sithis, Arkay Vaccine, and others in my mind. I found myself in the other holds of Skyrim, and eventually presented myself in solitude to the young widow of Torrik whom Stormcloak had slain. She was such a tiny and dainty thing, I imagined my fingers gripped around her throat as she slept. It would be so easy. And while respected, to a point, she was just a lapdog to General Tullius. From a distance, he didn't recognize me. All the better, I suppose, but if he tried to return me to the block, it was now a much more complicated issue. I stayed around for a few days until the target of my latest assignment came to bear, the Emperor's cousin, an important member of the East Empire Company. A signal loose from my bow, and she was now the unwilling bride of the dread father, yet never worthy to bear his children. I escaped with help from my brothers and sisters, and now the Imperial dogs scour the land for her assassin. When I returned to Whiterun, Lydia suggested I expand my holdings. A number of properties in that holded inn were now barren and ripe for purchase. I remembered noticing a small effective Akatosh on top of the fireplace. I never, as a general rule, held altars for worship in my home. I lacked the energy to prohibit its sudden inclusion, but remarked that I hadn't chosen him as my patron, at least not yet. Lydia just curtly remarked, I hadn't chosen him, but he had chosen me.